Why not? So big.
I'll give you this free. You get both on either one. Why don't I find somebody that's willing to do that? I look at pictures and well, I'll get a whole thing. Is your American film? No, I love it. Hey, you already got it. Get it again. Why not? It's got the button on it now. You got to get it. We got different buttons. Yeah. For a while there. Can we get that button? Yeah, I'm asking about
that. They got. Oh yeah, that goes back. Originals, yeah.
Got two dogs there. I don't know. He kept one of mine. I think the government did.
No, I took them both.
This is peace sign on those tags there too.
Yeah, shirt.
Yeah.
Four of those. A lot of whack. Four of them.
Vietnam veterans against the war. The war in Vietnam. And when that war ended, to continue the fight for justice for veterans and to prevent new Vietnam wars from being started in many parts of the world, and today, Central America in particular. We have been doing this for quite some 1987, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, VVAW, became the first Vietnam veterans organization established and opposed to the war, will celebrate its 20th anniversary. And whereas during the remaining years of the war, VVAW's membership grew rapidly, and following the end of the war, the organization turns its attention to the government's neglect of veterans and their problems. And whereas VVAW was the first organization to call attention to post-traumatic stress disorder, health problems related to Agent Orange, and the need for vet centers, and whereas VVAW has been involved in the struggle for civil rights from Cairo, Illinois to Cummings, Georgia, and has long participated in the movements against apartheid in South Africa and against increased U.S. military involvement in Central America, and whereas veterans from all over the country will be attending the 3 events arranged for June 13th, 1987 in Chicago, which include a memorial service at the Vietnam Veterans Fountain, a Vet Fest with music and speakers outside Bethany United Church, and a dinner inside the church hall. Now, therefore, I, Harold Washington, Mayor of the City of Chicago, do hereby proclaim June 13th, 1987 to be Vietnam Veterans Against the War Day.
Today, Heavenly Father, God who is both Mother and Father to all of us, we ask that you surround these young men and women with your healing love, that all the trauma and the suffering and the frustrations that they have been through in their lives will be converted into real energy to save the whole world. As we stand here today, we recognize that every death, every bit of destruction in the world takes from us, makes us bleed, makes us little less than real people.
I'm not the state chairman, by the way. I do work on the New Jersey State Anti-Apartheid Committee. I'm on the steering committee, and we have been active around the movement of the anti-apartheid movement for a couple years. We formed, and VVAW has been a regular and steady supporter ever since we've been in existence. I know some of the history of VVAW. I wasn't around when VVAW first started getting involved in the anti-apartheid issues, but I've seen some of the literature, and I know about that there's always been an issue in this organization. One of the things that we've been doing as veterans in Managua and in Central America, and about how we should uphold democratic ideals. I never see them speak out as strong, for South Africa and the injustices being done there. So it tells me something, organizations like this, and I don't see too many veteran organizations that come out and speak out about these issues. Maybe they can't see the relation, maybe they can't see, maybe they choose not to look at that stuff. But they have a lot of pain behind Vietnam, and besides bearing that pain, I think they should ask themselves why they had to go through what they had to go through. The war is over, but the policy still exists, The foreign policy of this country is basically a racist foreign policy. You should be commended for standing up and trying to bring these issues out. I know it's a lot of different chapters represented here, people from all over the country. It's hard work, But when we go into these schools, we gotta show how all of these problems in the world are related, and how they connected, and how that the type of thinking and policies that was set back in 1967 when this organization was born are still active today, and those people are still in power, and we have to try to change their minds. We have to educate people. Murderers, man, it's no doubt about it, Some of the stuff that's come out, around Contragate is the fact that the CIA is heavily involved in that war down there. John Kerry used to be a member of this organization. His office has done a whole investigation about how drugs play in this, cocaine. It's one of the big problems in my community, I'm sure in a lot of your communities, of cocaine abuse and drug abuse. And what's happening here is the same thing that happened in Vietnam. That, some of these forces that are supporting these so-called anti-communist movements around the world are also selling drugs, like they're sacrificing our own people, man, to kill other people somewhere else, Movements have been supported money-wise with money that was used and made profits made off the drug industry. That's the CIA helping. The policy still exists. We got to up the tempo. It is being up. We're being forced to up the tempo. I know in the New York area and around the country, some of the other chapters, we've got a new influx of veterans getting involved. People just can't sit back. If you was involved in the 60s, I don't see how you can look at the television and not feel like, hey man, I gotta get out there, I gotta stop there, I gotta see what I can do. Because the war in Vietnam wasn't stopped by the politicians. The war in Vietnam was stopped by people getting out in the streets and saying it's wrong. And that's what we gotta do in Central America. That's what we gotta do in South Africa. We gotta tell people, look, you worried about the Prince closing down, even though they're infiltrated by the CIA, long history of getting involved in the press. And then in South Africa, ABC, CBS, NBC newsman thrown bodily out the country, beat up, can't report, and you say nothing about that. We gotta bring this out, man. We gotta tell people. We gotta keep fighting. We gotta keep struggling. And hopefully there won't be a need for a 30th anniversary or 40th anniversary. You know, we were talking about that walking over from the hotel. If it is, man, you know, we ain't gonna be able to walk. We're gonna have to take the bus, wheelchairs and canes and stuff, you know?
Years ago and 15 years ago, the main cry of VVAW was bring our brothers home. Well, we want to make sure our brothers and sisters are not in a position to have us out there again to say bring our brothers home. There's a war brewing in Central America, and VVAW is part of the movement to make sure that it doesn't happen. We've been to Nicaragua 3 times now, and unlike the war in Vietnam, where for all practical purposes, besides Veterans for Peace, the only other organization that was a veterans one working against the war was VVAW. Now, all over the country is veterans organizations taking trips to Nicaragua, making stands to make sure that the war doesn't happen, and going out into schools and educating people about the similarities between war in Central America and Vietnam. Love us or fight us. They were very friendly people. Practically give us the shirt off their backs. They got rationing of basic foodstuffs, and we had whatever we wanted to eat, whatever we wanted to drink, and whatever we wanted to do, we were allowed to do it. At the same time, I saw around me that everybody had an AK-47. And we asked the government representatives that were talking at the time, we said, well, what's the program of the government? And it meant to me that basically the people do trust the government, because the first thing they did was pass out 300,000 AK-47s to the average people in the street who formed block community and the cooperative protective forces and that. And you can't pass out that amount of automatic weapons without having the confidence of the people so that they don't turn them around once again on the government. About a year ago, they passed out another 200,000. So if there ever is a U.S. invasion in Nicaragua, the GIs will basically face the same thing we did. A very hostile, unfriendly population that's going to be coming at us from all sides. But at the same time, they stressed to us that basically they loved the Americans and that they didn't want to fight us. They didn't want Reagan's Contras. They just wanted to be left alone to form their own thing in their own country. You got to let us know what you learned in Vietnam. Now tell us about it. So we all looked at one another, and nobody wanted to raise their hand first, so being that I was a dummy and volunteered in the Marine Corps, I volunteered to be first. My role in the delegation was to ask the embarrassing questions. You know, where's the Cuban helicopter pilots, and where's the Block Club watch that turns a neighbor in, and all this stuff, because I knew people were going to ask me that stuff. But I was paranoid about asking these questions at this particular engagement. So I let the people know about a story of determination that I saw in Vietnam. When I was in Vietnam, I got the feeling from the Vietnamese people that no matter what, they would fight us to the end. If they had to fight us with sticks, they'd fight us with sticks, because they had the determination and knew that they were right and they needed to get the foreigners out of their country. So I told the Nicaraguans that I saw the same look in their eyes, the look of determination to persevere under no matter how long it took or whatever the odds were, and that I was going to do my best when I got back home to make sure that we can continue our work to stop the upcoming U.S. war in Central America, and that I knew that they'd win in the long run. So everybody was interpreted over, and everybody applauded, and this little old man, a gray-haired guy, sitting next to me, I don't know, he might have been 67, I don't know how, it's hard to tell their age, because everybody looks so old. He got up and he gave me a big hug, and I said, what's that for? And his interpreter said, well, this man here used to fight with General Sandino right here in the province. And the only Marines he had ever hugged before were people he was killing, and he wanted to hug one that was alive that had learned his lesson. And
hundreds of families who are suffering health effects very similar to those of my family. And it was very important for me, not only for myself and for my family, but to get the information to other veteran families like ours, people who had nowhere to turn to. And again, VVAW was the only organization who helped me and continues to help my family to this day. I thank you all very much.
struggle, the VA has continued to lie to veterans and our families. At first they told us that no defoliants were sprayed in Vietnam. A few weeks after that, they told us that yes, they were sprayed, but they weren't dangerous to us. The stonewalling continues within the United States government and the Veterans Administration. The class action suit, which we worked on so hard for so many years, became almost a joke. Our lawyers sold us out for $180 million with no liability and no responsibility on the part of the chemical companies or the United States government. That is tantamount to leaving the veteran on the battlefield. And they will continue to forget us until we are once again in the streets, screaming and educating the people of this country to the dangers of toxic chemicals. In my work as Agent Orange Outreach Coordinator, I've dealt not only with veterans and their families, but I found myself more and more getting calls from people domestically exposed to herbicides and pesticides, farmers, chem-lawn applicators, all suffering the same types of symptoms that veterans and our children are suffering. The people at Love Canal, Times Beach, Missouri, Globe, Arizona, Bhopal, India, on and on and on. All of the symptoms are the same. The problems are the same. The responsibility lies with the chemical companies and the United States government. We must continue to do the work that is so important to veterans. Continue to educate people in this country to the problems of veterans. We need all of your help to do this. We cannot do it alone. We couldn't end the war in Vietnam alone. We can't stop the defoliation that's occurring in this country, the defoliation that's occurring in Central America without your help. Stephen Thielbauer, who was 2 months old, Eileen Kelly, 4 years old, Susan Dorsch, 6 years old, and Thomas Keaton, 16 years old. This is my hand on you, warm. This is my breath on you, warm. This is my heart in you, warm. This is my soul in you, warm. You will be here a long time, facing the sunrise with the warmth in you, without me. When you roll down, when you break apart, when the earth changes, and when the rock that's in you ends, we will be shining. We will be dancing, shining. We will be warm, shining together. Thank you very much.
The last day we were there, this was 5 weeks ago. The 5 of us who were there sat in a rather elegant room at the Cultural Affairs Ministry, listening to a man who had been a division commander for the National Liberation Front back when most of us had been in Vietnam the first time. He talked about how he too was looking forward to the day when no one would need to wear uniforms because the wars would be over. A few days before that, we had stood in a commune which was being built out of a wilderness of U.S. defoliation. A commune where the revolutionary youth of Ho Chi Minh City were using their youth, their vigor, their energy, their idealism to turn this land from nothing into a place that would produce for themselves and for the people of their country. They want more of us to come. They'd like us to talk the U.S. government into letting Vietnamese come to this country. No Vietnam national can get a visa to travel in the United States. They'd like to see relations between our two countries normalized. The war has been over for years, entirely by themselves. A whole room of the Revolutionary Museum in Hanoi is devoted to the peace movement worldwide, and particularly in the United States. And of course, VVAW VVAW buttons are on proud display in that room. Today, through the mail, I got a note from the American Vietnamese Friendship Society, which is in Ho Chi Minh City. Please address to Vietnam veterans struggle for peace, understanding, and friendship. There's nothing more that I can say. Thanks for coming. We look forward to having a great time the rest of the day.
Went on down to the recruit up man. That's when all my troubles began. I've been up, down, and around this country more than a couple of times. Living new till I got to the Navy. Thinking for yourself was a crime. Get over here, stand over there. Let's see your identification. Shut your mouth, son. Get back in line. We're sending you to Southeast Asia. Well, they gave me some boots that hurt my feet. They gave me some food not fit to eat. They told me that I wasn't country more than a couple of times. Living new till I got to the Air Force. Thinking for yourself was a crime. Get over here, stand over there. Let's see your identification. Shut your mouth, son. Get back in line. We're sending you to Southeast Asia. Oh yeah, What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. Nicaragua, or see Vietnam. Closer to our homeland, maybe, but just as bloody. The war that we are fighting here is for our liberty. Well, our leaders tell us one thing when the opposite is true. Does that sound like liberty to you? The lesson of war is no more war. The lesson of war is no more war. Well, we didn't need it then, and we don't need it now. No more war. Join me. The lesson of war is no more war. Yeah. Say the lesson of war is no more war. Well, we didn't need it then, but we don't need it now. No more war. One last time. The lesson of war is no more war.
Oh, far out. Well, dinner consists of a 3-bean salad, carrot and fruit salad, sweet and sour coleslaw, and the entrees are ham-baked in oranges, roast chicken quarters, and the vegetables are green beans, peas with lemon butter, corn with steamed carrots, glazed apple sweet potato combo, mashed potatoes, and chicken bean gravy. And then we're having mushrooms that Mary Murphy made. Our baker, Mary Murphy. And then we're having, sourdough breads, like dark, and dinner rolls, and some French breads, and herb butter, and regular butter, and coffee, and herb tea, and champagne.
Is this vet food? Is this what vets like?
This is what men like. And vet.
I was just sitting here thinking where I was 20 years ago.
Where were you 20 years ago?
I was enjoying the last summer of my youth. I was 17 years old. 4 months from now, I'd have been going into the Marines. 20 years. The first time I'd ever seen anything that was vaguely anti-war was the morning I reported to the induction center at 5:30. Some protester handed me this leaflet on the bottom stairs, and as I was walking up the stairs and started to read this, it dawned on me instantly. It's the first time I'd ever seen anything in print that was anti-war related. Just as I got to the top of the stairs, a real large white gloved hand grabbed me. It was the MP standing at the top to make sure I was going in the door. And that was the only piece of anti-war activity I'd ever known before I went in. Well, it sure changed a few years later.
Well, the first time I heard about VVAW, I was in a prison cell. The truth, when they took over the Statue of Liberty in New York in, what, 71? And,
you guys tell them about the time we went and saw the Stones in County Stadium.
Oh, yeah? Are they open today?
What were you doing in 22? Oh, it was in the penitentiary. I was doing 2 years for drugs.
Oh. Now, what'd you hear?
The VVAW took over the Statue of Liberty.
On the radio?
Yeah, or the newspaper. We didn't have radios or TVs back then. It's the bad old
All right. How are you?
I think the first time I heard of VVAW was really hard up for money, as we all were accustomed to in those days. And I went to work for a weekend for this company called VetPack, and they hired exclusively veterans. Well, I went in there on Friday night, and I went on at about 5 o'clock at night, and they took me out in this van. Streets were all plowed in, couldn't hardly walk to the people's houses, and I'm out there in 3 feet of snow delivering these damn articles of little or no interest to anybody about how much the price of ribs are at the store. So then I did it Saturday and I did it Sunday. Monday I went to get the money and the place had gone bankrupt. Well, they knew when they hired me Friday night that they were closing up Monday, for sure, because there's only 2 guys in the telephone. So I had heard about VVAW from somebody else, so I went to them and to John and Annie in Milwaukee to see if I could get some satisfaction out of it. Of course, by the time we got to the DA's office, that money was absconded with. That was my first run-in.
In '72, when I got out of prison, it's one of the first things I did.
John and Annie?
Yeah, John and Annie, Jack, Walter. Who else was around?
Buzz?
Buzz. I couldn't forget Buzz. I think David was still sitting in the corner rolling joints.
Asleep at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
What was VVAW like back then?
Well, it was pure energy, you know. Most of us were into, I don't know, there was a tight group of 10 of us that didn't do anything else besides anti-war activities. I mean, we hit demonstrations from one end of the country to the other. There was always something happening. We were always being sent out on some kind of a mission, you know. It was great fun. It was real camaraderie.
Yeah, you get it.
We're doing
No, the nice thing about VVAW was you got to be in the movement and you got to have fun at the same time.
That's true. People sure had a lot of fun in Milwaukee.
Yeah, we tried.
I was watching the demonstrations in Korea yesterday on television, thinking to myself, wow, that's just like Chicago in '67, you know, that's just like the conventions in Miami, beating up old people and anybody that they could come across on the street. I remember being one of the stragglers at one of them. We'd gone off to the side and there was about five cops chasing us, and they all had this bulletproof gear on, and plastic helmets, and they chased me and my girlfriend. By the time we got up to the top of this place, it was the 10th floor, and I was wondering what I was going to do because the door was definitely bolted from the other side. And this great big cop just comes up and he's huffing and puffing and drooling, and just a classic example of an oinker, you know. And I turned around, put my shoulder to the door one more time, and it went, and down we went. I thought another minute he'd had his hands on me.
And that nice thing about VVAW was you woke up on the wrong side of the bed in the morning, you took over the VA in the afternoon.
Yeah, wait a second.
The nice thing about VVAW was you woke up on the wrong side of the bed in the morning, you took over the VA in the afternoon. You feel better after that.
Didn't you guys take the VA over like once a week in Milwaukee?
Oh, I don't know about that. I was in on 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah, once a month anyway.
Once a month? What kind of work did you do there at the VA?
Oh, we'd just go in and try and occupy the director's office if possible, and give him a list of our demands, which he had no choice of listening to because generally we had the door locked with large nails. And but on a few occasions we had bad timing, and we'd get there and there wasn't any administrator anyway, so we'd just go in his office and take it over anyway. And of course the federal cops would have to get us out. I remember the last one was about 5 years ago. And we jacked the door off and came in. And then he took us down to the Federal Holding Center. And they had these guys in there that were like escaped murderers from prisons and stuff. And we were asking what they had done, and they were asking what we had done. You know? And I said, well, it was a $5 ticket for trespassing on federal property. That's the extent of it, because it was Veterans Day, and of course they didn't want to blemish the record any worse than it was. So they just gave us a ticket. Of course, some of us refused to pay it, and it made it even happen. And then the Justice Department people come in and question us themselves. And they said, well, okay, how many brothers and sisters do you have? When were mother and father born? And I says, I gave them my name, my age, and that was it. And they didn't like that.
The VVAW was when I got out of the service. I was at Fort Hood, and we formed a chapter of veterans and GIs at Fort Hood, Killeen area in Texas, where we did various demonstrations and protest actions around the war in Vietnam. And I came to New York and was involved, after a while I was involved in various actions in New York where we would protest at different parades, fighting for jobs for veterans, benefits of veterans. And then after a while, after the war ended and things started, I dropped out of VVAW And I've become active in the organization again because I realized that like the war in Vietnam ended, but the war didn't end. They just moved it to another country, and they were involved in fighting in Central America, Korea, the Philippines, you know, and that was seeing a repeat performance of the Vietnam experience. And like I said, the war didn't end. They just moved it to a new country.
And you're only how much? What's your book? Just sit on it.
Tell us something funny about it. What are you doing now in VVAW?
Well, I'm a member, I'm one of the coordinators for the New York, New Jersey chapter, and we do a lot of speaking in the high schools. One of the things we're very concerned about is the fact that young people have not been told about Vietnam. It's 20 years ago and people don't know what happened. They're trying to tell kids that, you know, bring back the whole John Wayne image using Rambo and Top Gun and trying to get people prepared for another war, you know, and it's like one generation later and they're ready to sacrifice the next load of kids. So we go around and we speak in high schools a lot, telling them about our experiences, telling them about what's happening in Central America and about the military, and encouraging them to take charge of their own lives and not let it happen to them what happened to us. And we're active in the struggle around peace in Central America against apartheid in Southern Africa, and wherever we can have a positive role for peace, as well as fighting for our rights as vets from the last war. Texas before, right in '71 before Dewey Canyon, so I don't know what the impact was on that. And in 1970 we had held demonstrations throughout military bases on Armed Forces Day, which were very successful. At Fort Hood, 1,000 guys marched, you know, so that was actually before Dewey Canyon. I know that VVAW itself, you know, like the link between, you know, I mean, you get out of the service and you're anti-war, and you know, like we had the chapter at Fort Hood, so it was like connection between served guys still in and the guys that had gotten out, because we were talking the same language, had the same problems and the same experience, you know, so it was like good for support. See, the peace movement was, the anti-war movement was good in terms of supporting us, but like they didn't have the experiences, you know, so like, there was always that difference between us, between veterans, you know, like GIs that get out of Fort Hood, we get on to Austin, you know, and you want to party, get high and whatever, and the peace movement, they would want to rap to you and get you into this political stuff. You're going down there to party, you know. And we got with VVAW,
next time you sell an article, I want you to get yourself.
It was better because they understood where guys were coming from, and it wasn't like that type of dichotomy. And also, you know, like I think that like the veterans are the best people to lead the anti-war movement because, as far as it goes, we know what the war is all about. You know, we know what the experience is about, so we can reach out to the people still in there, and that's what we were doing. You know, was reaching out to the people still in there, and the fact that guys were getting out, not just forgetting about the guys still in, and just saying, okay, now I'm out of the big green machine, so I can just go do my thing. They were, you know, they were still concerned about what was happening inside. It was very important because that was promoting the idea of unity and sticking together, and we care about each other. And, you know, I mean, the military, the whole thing in the military is to teach you every man stuck off there by himself, cover your ass, don't worry about no one else, no one's going to take care of you. And it was going against that and starting feeling solidarity and brotherhood, and that was very important.
Did you go on the last patrol, the convoy?
Yeah, I'll be here.
In whatever exists of the anti-war movement.
Well, I think that right now that there's a resurgence of veterans speaking up against what's happening because you see, like, we wanted the war to end, and when the war in Vietnam and Indochina ended, we were happy, and we thought, you know, like I think that what I felt was what a lot of people felt, that we said, let's hope America learned from this, you know, and a lot of people in America did learn from it. The problem is that people calling the shots in America is not the people, the regular people, it's big business and the government. And what they learn from it is just how to maneuver and manipulate the public so that they can continue with the same policies of interfering in some third world country and going in there and making as much as they can and setting up governments that'll let American corporations come in and rip the people off. And so, you know, a lot of guys see this, you know, coming up again, the same thing. And it's got a lot of people, and that's why I think there's a resurgence in veterans' anti-war activity. You know, VVAW, we've been around 20 years and we're hanging in there, you know, and like the organization is still relevant, you know. Against the war, people used to say against the war is over. Well, like I said, the war isn't over. The war just got moved to a new country. And we see, like today, Veterans Peace Coalition, which we're all in. You know, your veterans are the days when they could get us to just... Vietnam was the end of an era. That was the end of an era where a guy would march off to war and not ask any questions. You know, my father fought World War II, my grandfather fought in World War I. I thought it was what I was supposed to do. Nowadays, kids just start asking more questions. Vietnam taught this country, don't just go off blindly. And that's why we go and speak in the schools to make sure that they understand that clearly. You know, I think it's great, man. I think it's great seeing a lot of the people here, meeting new people, seeing old people, and I think that it's beautiful to see people keeping the faith.
Dewey Canyon 3, April of 1971. And he was around in the office working there when we
156 Fifth Avenue.
started working to
Madeline
organize.
Moore and Scott and John, and you guys and Robbie and Treglio and Hirsch and Jerry Ludwig.
Danny was probably hit on the head more for VVAW than anybody else in the history of the organization.
I had my head cracked open twice in 74, 71, 70, every year from 71 to 74.
In 74, didn't you get a cop with a megaphone?
Yeah.
I thought I remembered that.
You remember that one? I got him good too.
It's when all the disabled
They
vets
got me back though.
What
happened? They got me back. That was in Washington, July 4th.
Never forget a good hit.
We wanted to march in the streets.
Yeah.
This is like after, I don't know what happened, but, you know, they wouldn't let us march in the street, you know, and we said, fuck it, we want to march in the street, and we lined up. I got a clipping of that, as a matter of fact, right there in the thing. I have pictures of it and everything, and newspaper clippings. You don't want to see it on camera, though, right? But, they were standing there with their nightsticks, right? And I was like, I had this like portable PA system with a microphone attached to it, big heavy PA system that was supported by a canvas strap. These cops lined up against us and they had their nightsticks like this, blocking us. The guy kept jabbing with his nightstick. So I had this PA system, the canvas strap, wrapped around my wrist, and I grabbed the nightstick and I pulled the cops forward and whoop. And I laid them out good, like about 4 or 5 cops came after me, and I had my escape route planned out good because I glanced across the street, and there was a whole line, the cars on the curb were parked bumper to bumper. So I figured I was going to do back against the car and then do a backflip over the hood of the car, back into the park and make my escape. But I got hit a couple of shots on the way and I got disoriented. I ended up backing against a van. And I couldn't backflip over a van, so I got a couple of whacks in. Next thing I knew, I was having my head wrapped and bandaged and shit in some hospital, you know. And when I came back the same night, we led the march, the July 4th march, where everybody else came down from New York in the buses and met us and everything. And I had like bloody shirt and bandage on my head, and I was like, come on, you motherfuckers, let's go march and everything, man, you know. I remember everyone getting to New York, getting off the bus, seeing me with headbands and freaking out. I said, I'm okay, you guys get off the goddamn bus and start marching. We used to have these like winter soldier investigations. First was the original winter soldier investigation, then we had like little small ones all over the country. And we said we had this one in Long Island, the Garden City Hotel in Long Island, and like we had this like march through like 5 towns in Long Island with guerrilla theater and everything. And then we had this winter soldier investigation, and we stayed over at the Delphi University. I remember that, right in Garden City. And it was like really covered. We talked about shit that went down in Vietnam. People just didn't understand what was going down in Vietnam. And we like demonstrated through guerrilla theater. We actually had like reenactments of battles and semi-atrocities, just conditions in Vietnam, what was going on day-to-day basis in Vietnam. We reenacted the street, all the guerrilla theater. And then we did this through 5 towns on Long Island. People like freaking out, they screamed like, believe it was going down. It was like holy blood, real like, you know, like people who played a whole series of stuff that was going on. We had the march. We had to march through the 5 towns of Long Island, the Winter Soldier investigation, Garden City Hotel.
Tell me what it was. Winter Soldier investigation?
Well, the original Winter Soldier investigation was done.
Detroit.
Detroit. Detroit. And that was basically vets testifying as to atrocities and just basically the truth of what was happening in Vietnam. You know, the whole nature of the war that the American people at this time, which was 1971, was not really aware of what was really happening in Vietnam. And I came back in '68. I got in the Army '69, and we were surprised when she had seen in the paper that people just weren't aware of what was going on in Vietnam, what kind of war it was. And the word Winter Soldier comes from the American Revolution, which you all know, right? So should I just say it anyway, or it doesn't matter? It's redundant, right?
No.
These are Thomas Paine said, "These are times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and sunshine patriot shall in this time of crisis shrink from the service of his country. But he who stands now deserves the love and thanks of all men and women." This was said in Valley Forge in the winter of 1776, or something like that. So if the summer soldier and sunshine patriot are those who left Washington's army to return because the winter was too hard, then these who stood and fight when times got tough were considered the winter soldiers. And the Vietnam vets who came back and stood up and said this is wrong, we considered ourselves the winter soldiers. Because it was easy to come back home and just go back into the woodwork and make believe we didn't exist, but we insisted upon being heard, and that was important. And to this day, I think it saved many of us from having a lot of problems that affect a lot of Vietnam vets to this day. I deal with Vietnam veterans now. I work for the Council for the State of Veterans Affairs in New York. I work in VA hospital, and most of the vets who have severe problems never did anything related to a veteran's experience, when they first got home. They just went back into life and just caught up on them after a while. But I think we expunged our devils in 1970, 71, 72, 73, 74. We had marches in New York, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where we used to trip on acid and, all night and march and speak all night, day. And I worked at the national office when I was in New York, and I head up the Speakers Bureau, and we used to send speakers to high schools and junior high schools and show films and talk to the kids. Anytime a recruiter would show up at school, we'd show up and we'd give the other point of view. The movie Coming Home with John Boyd and Jane Fonda sort of was a story about VVAW, although it wasn't, but it was. That's basically, John Boyd was a one-man VVAW in that movie, and basically that's what VVAW is about. A vet that came home and felt he had to do something to keep other people from doing the same thing. And I think we were very successful in what we did at the Brooklyn VA hospital, that just haven't, like I say, expunged their devils. Some of them never came home from Vietnam. They've never reconciled what went down in Vietnam to their expectations before they went over, to the treatment when they got home. I think those of us in we had rap groups in 1971, 1972. We had Vietnam vet rap groups for something that we called post-Vietnam syndrome. Not until 1979, I think, or 1980, 79 and 80, something like that, did a diagnosis come out for that, which they labeled post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the DSM-3, as a recognized psychological disorder by the American Psychiatric Association. But that's talking about 79, 90, whatever it was. And 1971, 1972, we were having rap groups and we were pushing. We said there were guys that had PTSD, we were calling it PVS then, post-Vietnam syndrome. And we had rap groups dealing with it, talking it out. Plus we were saying, okay, we were young guys, we were caught up in the John Wayne syndrome. We went over to kick ass and found out it was fucked, and we came back and said, okay, we fucked up, we were wrong. We're gonna do something about it. We're gonna try to end this bullshit, and we're gonna try to keep other kids from following our footsteps. And we were doing stuff about it in 70, 71, 72, 73, 74. some guys past that even, like Ed, you know, and I think it's sort of, in a way, it's sort of like made up for it. It's like, you know, we got our shit out on the table. We said, okay, this is what we did, and this is what we're doing now about it, you know? And it's so, you know, it ain't gonna change what happened, but at least it shows that we're dealing with it, you know, that, you know, our experience over there was like, you know, it was a reaction, like I said, and like you said, your words, a new set of rules. That's exactly what it was. You could do anything that you could get away with was okay over there, you know, and it was good. I mean, like that disco song, 19. The average age of Vietnam vet was 19. In World War II, the average age was 26. That's in the maturity stage of someone growing up, and that's a big difference, you know. An average age of 7 years difference. You know, when you're a 26-year-old man is, you know, develop some sort of sense of priority, some sort of sense of morality. It's a 19-year-old kid, he just got out of high school, he might have played some football, he might have been hanging, and it's into war. It's like a continuation of his childhood, really, you know? It's like you go from watching combat to playing combat, you know, and like to real combat, you know? And it's like an extension. To me, like, I remember my first firefight, you know, I was thinking, well, what would Sergeant Saunders do like in a situation like this? What would John Wayne do in a situation like that? And then like, one day I just waking up and said, well, fuck, these guys never in Vietnam, man. They never fucking got real bullets fired at them, man. I gotta watch out for my own butt, you know? And I wanted to buy somebody a drink, you know, and some woman screamed at me and she was gonna have me arrested and like somebody spit at us stuff, you know, and like, I mean, it's just, everything was different, you know, and like, it just was traumatic, you know. The World War II guys, they came home, shiploads of them, and, you know, the parades, and we came home like a plane load at a time in the middle of the night at Travis Air Force Base and sort of snuck in the country, a plane load at a time. When World War II guys went over to fight, they went over to fight for the duration until the war was over. We went over for 12 months. It was like a prison sentence. You did your 12 months and you were home free. So from the time you got over there to the time you left, it was just survival. So if I can live for 12 months, I'm okay, you know. I got shot twice over there. I didn't think I was gonna make it the second time, you know. They still sent me back out to fucking fight again. You know, I could have gotten shot 3 times, then they would send me home. You know, it might have been too late for them. It might have been in the box or a body bag or whatever, you know. Anyway, when I got involved with VVAW, I remember the first time I like ever thought about doing anything. I was like, I was still in service at the time. I was home on leave. I was stationed at Fort Knox. It was after Vietnam. Most of my friends that I grew up with never went in service. They stayed in college, and they were in Hunter College. Remember Hunter College, Eddie? And I went over there to visit. I was in my uniform, and there were two young women outside the cafeteria that had a table, a peace table against the war. And I went over to give them a hard time. I started telling them all the right reasons why we should be in Vietnam. And then like I stopped in the middle and I said, I found myself saying what I was told like in basic training in AIT. You know, it was like indoctrinated bullshit. And then I stopped myself and said, wait a minute, this is what I was told. But this isn't what I saw and what I experienced. And like I just stopped in the middle and just walked away because I couldn't believe I was saying what I was saying, you know, and like, so I retreated for a few months and got out of service, and then VVAW, I was in Florida, Easter vacation. VVAW was in the news, and I went back to New York and said, yo, these guys are for me, man. You know, and I just got into shit. I was working down on 5th Avenue when everybody else was in Washington for Dewey Canyon 3, and Mayday shit and stuff that went down, and the rest is, as they say, the rest is history.
I'm from the East, but I was doing graduate work at the University of Texas in 1970. And I had been involved with SDS when I was at Columbia University in '68. And in Texas in '69, in '70, SDS was not very politically active. My involvement with VVAW was different from that of most vets because I'd been in the military, but I had not been in Vietnam. And I did not think that I qualified to join. And I was looking around after 1969 and '70 for some political organization that was effective because SDS no longer was. And my veteran friend said, hey, you know, you were in the military, so you qualify. So that's how I joined. And I think I joined it from my experience of what most vets were like in those days, a very, very different reason. Because we'd get these vets, and it was really kind of terrifying for me sometimes. I'd meet these guys up at Killeen who 6 weeks before had been in some fire base in Vietnam, and they were crazy. And their reason for joining VVAW was probably because they'd heard about it in Vietnam, and they were furious about what had happened to them, and they vaguely felt that it was the military, it was the U.S. government, that there was something wrong. It was a kind of an inchoate lashing out. And my decision was a conscious political one, so that was different from that point of view.
And I've been in VVAW since a couple of vets found that I could do medical care. My only contact with the military myself was a brief stint in the public health service where I got kicked out for assassinating a colonel, which wasn't done, but at the public health service I had taken care of a lot of guys who had just come back and realized that the problems of vets and the problems we had seen people who had been oppressed in the South when I did civil rights work and the problems that the demonstrators were having were all about the same thing. I chose to work with VVAW. 68.
68?
68.
Wow,
she's older than us, Nicholas.
She goes back before anybody.
And started off fighting with guys. Started off fighting with the guys who insisted that veterans knew what was best for their own health. Veterans knew what was best for their own, what they could tolerate. I had a tremendous battle with Al Hubbard, who later became a real good friend. I almost threw him off a 10th floor balcony because he insisted that he had to be in charge of deciding who could tolerate continuing and who couldn't. But it all worked out. I learned to respect the vets, and they learned that when I pulled somebody off a line, I was usually right, and it worked out real good. I have a problem with that because, except for about 9 guys, the first 5 years, none of them noticed I was female.
You just think that.
No, it's true. About halfway through meeting, somebody'd say fuck, and then somebody would look at me and suddenly notice there would be this, oh, excuse me, and I'd be hysterical. And that to this day is happening with me and Lori Sandow. That'll happen occasionally at meetings. Oh yeah, there's a female here.
No, but what I think I was referring to was the fact that there was, for instance, there were vets in the organization who felt that the only people who should be in the organization were people who were combat vets.
Right.
And others who felt, well, anybody who'd been in Vietnam was okay. And the bylaws stated that anybody who'd been in the military, which let me in. I always felt kind of like, that's one of the reasons I never wanted to be a national officer, because I hadn't been in combat in Vietnam. And I didn't want to be put in a position of somebody saying, well, what did you do in Vietnam? Then I'd say I wasn't in Vietnam, and then have to get into a whole explanation about, which would distract from the issue. And I felt that that was something we didn't need, was distracting.
Hadn't been in Nam. And it all basically worked out to the people who were doing the work out of respect. And so that, it didn't matter. I didn't get involved with discussing who was going to be Winter Soldiers and who was going to be VVAW. We were too busy in New York doing the work and trying to run gigs and do demonstrations and plaster George Bush with blood. It was
an awful lot of time and energy was expended on trying to resolve those questions.
Absolutely, but I come to the organization from a conscious political standpoint. I started off in civil rights, and you couldn't escape lots of discussion about politics and who was a communist and who was a socialist and who consciously was opposing the war from a political standpoint and who was opposing it from personal pain, gut issues. But I guess for me, it's just my own personality that I could sit and do those discussions, and it really, that wasn't the point. For me, the point was getting the work done. I lost my first husband behind the civil rights movement. He was beat up in '65 and died in '67. And after that, I was just doing work for 2 people. And it was almost like I refused to allow in a lot of this other stuff. I mean, I knew where I wanted to work. I knew the goals, the directions of the organization were right. Let's get the work done. You know, people got split heads, let's clean them up. We need a demonstration, let's go ahead and do it. And I never wanted to be an officer, not because I was afraid that people would question my status as a non-vet, not non-vet. I'm not a non-vet. I didn't want to be an officer because I wanted to get out and do the work. You can't really be national officer and go do medical every other day. It just didn't work out. So I did the medical. That's where my talents lie. And so I didn't get into as much of that as a lot of people. I mean, I heard the discussions, I was at the meetings, I put in my 2 cents, but that was the meetings. And it didn't really have that much to do with getting the work done.
There was also, or at least my recollection was, there was also a lot of discussion and agonizing over whether the fact that Vietnam Veterans Against the War was a veterans organization, and yet it was involved in trying to make itself into almost into a mass organization for political change. And how could you be a mass organization for political change if you drew upon such a limited constituency, which was just young males who've been in the Army, expanded a little bit to include other who've been in the Army in Vietnam, or expanded a little bit to include men who've been in the Army, and then there was a whole question of whether women could or couldn't or should or would. And it seemed to me, my recollections are that there was a lot of energy expended, which was very draining and damaging to the organization.
Damn straight. That's why I didn't want to deal with it.
It must have been in the early 70s. I mean, while we were doing all the other things.
Sure. The whole women's lib clashes with VVAW deal, which the first couple of times I was really torn up about where are my loyalties, you know, are my loyalties with my sisters or are my loyalties with the guys that I've been working with shoulder to shoulder and break and sweat with. Yeah, and friends and lovers and but more than just, you know, my sisters sounds real cute, real close, but I was closer with the vets than I ever was with a lot of these women who insisted on being my sisters, but when it came time to get the work done, split, you know, because they didn't want to break a nail. I mean, and in Miami, it's true. Not all the women were like that, but in Miami it came to a head when the Women's Anti-Rape Squad, every time, virtually every time there was anything threatening going on, would scream, call a vet.
Yeah, that was for sure.
And
but
I was like, hey, you know, this is bullshit. The one funny story was this poor guy who was tripping his ass off, wandering through camp naked with a heart on, and walked past the Women's Anti-Rape Squad, and they freaked out. They're like, get a vet, he's threatening. I said, the man is like tripping his brains out. I walked over, I put his little dick down, I pulled up his pants and zipped his fly, and he left. You know, I mean, it was like real threatening. And I said to myself, these ladies have to get their act together before I can interact with them and feel like they're close like I am with the vets. I mean, here we are, let's get the work done, you know. If you're the Women's Anti-Rape Squad, then be able to deal with these minor little threats. You know, nobody's asking you to put your life on the line, but, you know, at least be able to sit somebody down who's tripping.
I have a somewhat different impression about the people who were responsible there at the convention in Miami on what we call the land at Flamingo Park. That was the greatest conglomeration of flakes, crazies, maniacs, idiots. Some probably, a lot of them, we came there with quasi or full-fledged political motivations, but oh God, the weirdos that were there is just unbelievable. And out of that, the only people that were saying that you could rely on to do anything was the women's group and the vets. And it was a sort of my recollection is that there was a kind of, they developed a kind of a relationship between the two organizations. The two knew that they could rely on each other.
But that was the other women's group. This was not the women.
Maybe that was not the women's rape. Right. I just remember we had excellent relationship with the women's group.
You had with some of the Jane Fonda and with Gloria Steinem and with that whole group, yes.
Oh, we didn't have any. I didn't have any contact with them. I'm just talking about just the women's group there. They had a unified area where they were, just like we did. We had a perimeter, and we. I must admit that there were also some of the funniest. They had the loudspeakers. Remember the loudspeakers that they were on 24 hours a day. And they had not the yippies, but the zippies.
Right.
The zippies had these.
Forsad and the zippies.
They would get up there and talk, and the funniest shit came over those microphones. You listen to it, you fall down laughing all day long. It was so hilarious. And then every drug in creation was, and every wombat that ever crawled out of a knothole was thrown around. just, I don't know if anybody's gone over this, but you know, the convention at Miami was a replacement, the Republican convention at Miami was a replacement for the convention, the Republican convention in San Diego. And there was a belief held by a number of people, apparently based on some measure of reality, that as part of the dirty tricks that eventually emerged in Watergate, that the Nixon administration, Nixon himself, or people some way on up the ladder, the Segretti type people, had planned a fake insurrection on the part, a provoked insurrection on the part of the masses of crazies in San Diego that would then justify Nixon declaring martial law, canceling the elections. That was the belief. Whether or not it ever got to a real concrete level where it was being seriously considered, I don't know. Other people know better than I probably about that. In any case, people began planning, and that is the genesis of the whole Gainesville 8 conspiracy that Bill Leamer was the prime provoker of. Leamer felt, VVAW people came to think that something had to be done about this. And their solution was a violent one, provoked by Leamer. Then, of course, the case broke, our people were indicted, and by the time the convention occurred, it became very important to a lot of us to make sure that none of the things that the government was accusing the Gainesville 8 of, that is to say violent insurrection, provoking demonstrations, using gunfire, explosives, etc., that none of that occur, because we felt that it might be possible that the government would then say, we accuse these people of that, and that's what did happen. And therefore there's a link, and that's prima facie evidence that they were guilty, etc. So the agenda of at least some of us going to Miami was probably a lot different than the agenda of the mass of the people who went to Miami. Most people were going there to protest in some sort of general sort of fashion. And a lot of people wanted to go there and raise hell. And some of them may have wanted to go there and raise hell in a very specific violent fashion. As closely associated, as a person who was closely associated with the Gainesville 8, the people who were being accused of conspiracy to commit riot, my prime concern was, yes, that we needed to have demonstrations, but we definitely had to keep a lid on anything that could be interpreted as violence. And that was one of the reasons why I and several other people thought up what we called the silent march. Remember when we all marched silently? I had seen that happen in 1968 in the Tlatelolco, after the Tlatelolco demonstrations in Mexico, when the slaughter occurred there. In August, July, August, I guess it was in September, they had what they call La Marcha Silenciosa. And the people marched down, hundreds of thousands of people marched down the Paseo La Reforma, which is an enormous wide avenue, and not a sound except the thump, thump, thump of the feet. It was the most impressive thing I'd ever seen in my life in protest against the government. And I thought maybe we could do something like that. Let's line up in orderly groups, because generally we marched as a rabble, and hold ourselves in military precision and march down and never say a word. And that was one way of, we want to manifest our protest, we want to be there. We can't go around telling all of these vets, let's not do anything, let's keep it cool, because they just wouldn't listen to us. On the other hand, we had to keep things under control. So that's my recollection of a very complicated agenda that some of us had in Miami in 1972. Land was a flamenco park, and we had, Barry would know better about this. Barry, were you there? Were you part of the advance group that was there? You were there? Okay, these people were there before I was. But yeah, you were there. But they had, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was that the arrangement was with Nick, what was his name? The Brooklyn guy who was chief of police in Miami at the time. He was a fairly liberal Democrat type. Yeah. Nick Poletto or something. No, that's not his name. But anyway.
Sounds like it's from Brooklyn.
Yeah. He's
the Miami police chief was pretty cooperative initially.
Right.
But partly because the city of Miami and Dade County, which Miami is in, and also the federal government civil defense people assured him that there would be certain things going on, and everybody got together to do this. And one of my jobs, and Lori Sandow's jobs, who's sitting here, was to go down early and to make sure that this actually got done. And we were involved with medical communications and stuff like that. And there was every other day before the Democratic Convention, things were about to fall through here, fall through there. The first funny story I have from Florida was that my grandfather, who had been dead, I forget how long, he died in '64, helped us get the medical supplies released. Because the doctor from the city of Miami was saying you can't have the medical supplies 1 hour early and nobody's going to have any medical emergency. And people are already moving into the park. And we need, you know, sunburn stuff and Band-Aids and aspirin and shit like this. And luckily, I look at one of these Red Cross ladies, and she's 104 years old, and I walked over and I said, did you by any chance know Jack Lang? He was National Disaster Chairman of Red Cross. She said, oh, yes. I said, I'm his granddaughter. Can I have the medical supplies? She said, oh, yes, dear, you can have whatever you want. And the city of Miami went out of its mind, but the police chief couldn't do anything at that point.
Well, in relation to that, you know, Miami Beach, there are lots and lots of Jews in Miami Beach. Lots of people used to go up to the tables to get food with tattoo marks from Dachau and Auschwitz and places like that. And the general tenor of their remarks was, you boys are too violent. You should cool it, you know, the democratic process. You shouldn't, you know, you shouldn't provoke. And all that we try and explain to them and like that. And I remember going here and there, oh, you know, I was always getting this shit from them. Then the Nazis, we'll tell you the story about the Nazis. The Nazis came and we threw the Nazis out. I have a picture of me with another guy slinging a Nazi. We carried him in through the air and we slung him out into the street. The next day, oh, God, you just couldn't have imagined the reaction of these Jewish people. They'd give us fruit, they gave us food, chicken soup,
beer.
Would you say we drowned in chicken soup?
Chicken soup, you know.
It was incredible.
Eat, it's good for you, eat.
I said, what about all this violence, lady? Hey, you know, that guy landed on his keister, huh? That didn't feel, no, it's different. The Nazis, it was funny.
20 or 40 goose-stepping Nazis through one of the oldest, most working-class kind of Jewish neighborhoods that we'd seen in a long time, had a dramatic effect. And the fact that the vets just surrounded them and carefully, cheerfully carried him out of the park and dropped him.
It wasn't quite that.
Only one Nazi got hit with a chair.
It wasn't quite that sanitized. Look,
I only sewed up one vet.
After, what happened was that just as the caravan was coming in from the Midwest, points west. I was on my motorcycle running back and forth, guiding these guys to as they were coming in. And somebody came to me, as I'm sure they came to a lot of people, and said, hurry up, we got up in the corner of the land, which was rectangular, there was a flatbed, a semi-flatbed, and that was used as a stage. And some women's group had been up there talking about their issue, and these, about 20 guys in their 20s to 40s, black suits and white shirts, no swastikas on those guys, walked in, preempted the stage, I guess pushed or shoved or at least got the women off the stage and got up there and started spewing this racist Nazi bilge. Like, look at that dirty little Jew down there, would you like your nation to be turned into things like that, and on and on. So somebody comes running down to me and says, the Nazis are up there and there's going to be a riot. And that was one of the things I was saying about Nick What's-His-Name. The arrangement was, as I understand it, sort of a tentative, it was not written down, that as long as you people can police the land, we don't send the police in. But if anything gets out of hand, we come in and then all bets are out and we'll clean the place out. Was that approximately the agreement?
Right, and in addition to that, we all felt, or those of us that had participated early on felt, that the Nazis coming and certain other groups arriving and some of the dope that was being sold that was bad were efforts by somebody to cause this to break down, right. to give somebody an excuse to go ahead and take over the land.
And that's why my initial reaction, which was wrong, but my initial reaction was let the Nazis speak, free country, all that bullshit. We'll let the Nazis speak. Now, I had not been aware at that time that they had physically thrown the people off the stage, which I think negated their right to get up there and speak. But what I was concerned about, and I think all of us were who were there, we had about, how many guys came in that caravan?
1,200.
Several hundred. Tired, dirty, You know, they've been harassed by the police all the way across the United States. It was pretty reasonable to think they wanted to lash out at somebody. And so here they were with these vets, and it could have turned into a riot with these Nazis, and it could have turned into a riot very easily, and that could have been a pretext. See, that was one of the things that some of us were doing throughout that entire thing, trying to keep the lid on without trying to repress natural enthusiasm. And and also we had a bunch of SDS provocateurs. They'd get at the back of the crowd and throw rocks at the Nazis, who would then lash out at the crowd, and so it was a perfect thing to explode. So the first thing we did was to get a perimeter of vets holding hands and arms around the stage. And then we went over to the Nazis and said, you guys gotta get out of here. And they were arrogant, and I couldn't understand. I said, you know, there are 2, 3, 4, 5,000 crazy kids out there. You're surrounded by an organized group, and you're up there. You're arrogant. You're insulting. I said, you guys got balls. They were just crazy.
No, they were stupid.
And stupid. And then one of our guys, who was it that got hit?
Steve. Tall blonde guy named Steve from Miami. Because he took 3 stitches over the eye.
He went over, and I think he grabbed the legs of one of the Nazis, and the Nazi picked up a chair and hit him over the head, and that blew it.
And then, well, no, Danny just walked over real quiet, picked up the chair, and it exploded. You know, I mean, the chair hit the Nazi, and there were pieces of chair going in 4 directions. Because I was already taking care of Steve by that time.
And then the problem was, how do we keep these vets from killing these Nazis? And literally, I pulled guys off who had their hands around Nazi throats. And you should have seen that change. One guy shit himself, another guy pissed his pants. All of a sudden, the Nazis did. All of a sudden, they realized these aren't a bunch of young anti-war kids. These are trained killers, and they're going to kill us. And they would have. They would have.
Well, Mingo was one of the people who mentioned the role of the veterans. I think that we were probably one of the most visible forces for educating people. I mean, the Nazis was one thing. Some of the people, some of the delegates certainly got educated. We were able to attend the Democratic Convention in a body, which was real interesting. And I think partly as a result of that, gains of attending the Democratic, some of the vets, say Senator Kerry, for instance, gained some panache with the National Party there. The Republicans, I don't think we did a thing except get the blessed people tear gassed. Which I thought was real nice. And as far as the Republicans got tear gassed. We were in the streets and they were tear gassing us and forgot that there were intake vents on the Republican National Convention. The tear gas and the intake vents reacted as they will, and the Republicans wound up getting tear gassed in their convention, which I thought was appropriate. As far as how that relates, how I feel about being here at the meeting, I think some of it, you know, seeing people I haven't seen since Miami, and knowing that we're all still working on the same stuff, it's good. It's a big part.
What are you working on today?
I'm working with New York, New Jersey VVAW. And all the things that we're working on, physical organizing, trying to keep the chapter together, moving ahead in New Jersey. We just started having meetings. I do some local stuff. Hanging in.
I think that we, in the short term, we did achieve what our objective as far as keeping that from something from exploding at that convention that would work against the trial. Nothing came out. I remember we did catch one guy who had all the equipment for disruption. We took it away from him, and nothing happened. We were able to keep the Nazis under control. The police never came in until the last night, but then we were leaving anyways. I remember people lying on the ground when the helicopters were coming over with searchlights coming down, and we all lay down and said, "Fuck you," on the ground. Everybody lying on the ground in great big letters, "you," with our fingers up like this. And I left out of that with suffering an attack of kidney stones. I remember I was unconscious all the way to Gainesville.
It was God getting you.
God was getting me. In a larger sense, you know, we were part of a struggle. I think we contributed to it. Of course, the convention you know, people called it justifiably the coronation, not the selection. That was a real low point as far as, I mean, here Nixon was acclaimed God, and so at that particular moment, you couldn't say that we'd won. But that was just 2 years away from a complete disintegration of the whole Nixon thing and the end of the war. So yeah, and I, for instance, have continued to be active. Shortly after that, I joined the Indochina Peace Campaign, a thing that Tom Hayden was instrumental in setting up, and I worked with that, and I think that was very important in helping to bring the end of the war to an end until 1975. In 1975, I began working with an organization called the Ohio Public Interest Campaign, which works on issues like toxic waste that may seem very prosaic in relation to what we were doing then, but it's important. Toxic waste and tax abatement and nuclear power, rate shock and things of that sort. And I'm lucky enough to be being paid to do political work. I have an office. I have 2 telephones on my desk.
Do you have any openings on the staff?
I even have a secretary. I don't get any money. I mean, our salaries are $15,000 to $20,000 a year, but we have a large organization in Ohio, and that's one of the happy things that came out of, not directly VVAW, but out of that whole mass of anti-war people. Everybody that started that organization were all crazies back in the 60s and early 70s. And for me, this reunion is really nice, because I have been pretty separated from VVAW for 12 years or so, and I haven't seen a lot of these people. This is just bringing back all kinds of memories. And it's one of the important things about VVAW, this is a very personal note, one of the important things about VVAW was that vets were able to come back and talk about their experience in Vietnam. Well, I'm getting older now. I'm deaf in this ear. I don't see as well. It's nice to be back with old farts like these people, and who shared all these experiences that you don't have to go through a whole lot of explanation.
And louder? Oh, my name is Ed D'Amato. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. And this is Dennis Kroll from Madison, Wisconsin. And this is Mr. Peter Zastro from Chicago, Illinois. And this is Mr. Barry Roma from Chicago, Illinois. And at the end of April, the 4 of us went to Vietnam. For the 3 of us, the second time. To Barry, the 3rd time. We stayed there for 9 days. We went to Hanoi. We first flew into Hanoi on, I think, April 27th? 29th. April 29th. We stayed there for 4.5 days, and then flew to Ho Chi Minh City, formerly called Saigon, and stayed there for 5 days. And I thought it would be a nice thing for us to try to recollect some of our memories of what the trip meant to us, to go back. I had been in Vietnam with the 9th Infantry Division in 1967, February 1967, February 1968, as part of the Joint Army-Navy Mobile Riverine Force. And this 1967 was 20 years ago, so the 20th anniversary of my going to Vietnam coincided with the 20th anniversary of the founding of VVAW. So I guess 2020 is the number you play in the lottery. Anyway, it was, for me, it was just the trip of a lifetime. It was also, in a sense, I'm 40 years old now, so in a sense it's like 20 years, you know, like that maybe my life is in 20-year cycles. The first 20 years I was, you know, Ed D'Amato from Queens, New York. And then the next 20 years was this passion with Vietnam. First being there for a year, spending 17 years in VVAW, fighting against the war, speaking about the lessons of Vietnam, and then closing out that 20 years with spending 9 days in Vietnam in a much different atmosphere, in an atmosphere of peace, and in an atmosphere of almost having a sense of going home again, because this focal point of my life for 20 years you know, it was a very moving experience for me. From the time that the plane began to land in Hanoi and seeing the unmistakable craters created by American bombing.
Which have now been turned into fish ponds and fish farms by the North Vietnamese.
Some of them. Some of them were just holes in the ground. But anyway, it was a very moving experience, and I think some of the other guys.
I think for myself, when I arrived in Vietnam the first time, which was in February of 1970, all I really ever saw was Cam Ranh Bay, which was better than Fort Polk, Louisiana, where I had just come from. So, you know, I thought this was what Vietnam was about, but I never really got a chance to experience the Vietnamese people and their culture and see who they really were. To me, they were nothing but, you know, targets, the enemy. And I was sent immediately out to the field and was wounded and sent immediately back home. So, you know, I never got that chance to experience it. And to me, I think the most fantastic part about the trip was just to visit Vietnamese people, to experience who they were and to receive their feelings towards us. It was fantastic. I mean, I never thought I would see a North Vietnamese in my life. And to me, walking around the streets of Hanoi and really feeling that genuine warmth and friendship coming from them, and you know, seeing our button in the War Museum, and I almost got a feeling like we were folk heroes to them. Almost everybody had heard about the veterans who fought the war and then went home and fought for peace, and they were so proud to meet us. And we all talked about it, meeting these people who worked in intelligence and underground for 15, 20 years and just survived. Incredible odds of surviving. You know, their warmth and love for us was just, it was worth everything for that.
If you read a book and suddenly you've enjoyed reading it and the last 20 pages aren't there, what you have is a sense of immense frustration. And my sense is that's what a tour in Vietnam was when we were there with the military. And so that in some way what was happening now was kind of the end of the tour. We could read what had happened. This is what had gone on in Vietnam. This was the result of our experience of having been there. And the result was that the tremendous resiliency of the Vietnamese people had built a country which is poor, but extremely energetic, where kids could be out at 5:15 in the morning playing volleyball, with no parent around. My kids could not be out on the streets of Chicago at 5:15 in the morning. Where we could walk down the streets of Hanoi, the capital of the country. We went over there to fight, drop bombs on and all the rest, at 9:30 at night, and feel safer than I would feeling probably walking down this street in Chicago. And that was the end of the tour. We had seen what had happened as a result of our having fought the war, as a result of their having won the war, and the result of their having rebuilt after we left. Which, for me, turned it into an experience that is obviously very memorable.
Yeah, when you see the movies on Vietnam, and even Platoon, and this goes Platoon, the Vietnamese are very cardinal. They walk on characters whose sole reason to exist is to provide either a target or a target for the U.S. to shoot at, or for a focal point for a firefight. But they have no life or existence. And one of the things that was nice was going to Vietnam and meeting people that over a period of time defeated the U.S. and the Japanese and the French. And in the U.S., I worked with Vietnam vets for a long time, someone says, I spent 2 years in Vietnam, or I spent 3 years in Vietnam, and they all sort of sit back and go, ah. We met a guy who was underground for 18 years in Vietnam. 18 years. And you wouldn't have known it if you met him in a bar. We went to a child care center, and we were all getting a little tired, you know. They just pushed us to see everything in the world, and the child care center was great. We're going, please let this discussion end, and we're all walking out, and all of a sudden the interpreter says, oh, by the way, madam, such and such, who was the head of the Children's Association, was in Con Son Island for 5.5 years, and I know all of our jaws dropped. I mean, here was a woman we'd been talking to, we had no inkling of, had been tortured, you know, the physical, the sexual, and the mental torture that was put on in the tiger cages of Con Son for 5.5 years, and we wouldn't have been able to tell if they hadn't told us that. And that was what was really good about the trip, because it goes more than those last 20 pages. It's like a book of 500 pages that should be 1,020 pages. And it combines with that thing about them liking us. You know, that we were sought out by people. People would find out that we were Vietnam vets, and they would like grab us. Here's another meeting we got to go to. And we got tired of going to meetings, and for us it started to get tedious, but here was a chance for them to talk to Americans and for veterans. And once we got over this initial part of the meeting, it was like indescribable. Indescribable. Something that we'll take with us forever. And hopefully something that we can give people back here. And beyond that, hopefully something where Vietnam vets in the United States can realize they're welcome visitors in Vietnam. Welcome visitors. They'll be more welcome in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City than they will be in Cairo, Illinois.
There was,
especially Washington, D.C.
there was a couple of points during the trip when I had this sense of foreboding. One time we went to visit the Agent Orange Commission. Is that the official?
Yeah, something.
The Agent Orange Commission. Half my mind's like, was it Civ? So information goes in, finds out. But anyway, they showed us this slideshow of a lot of it was information about statistical facts on Agent Orange. And then the slideshow ended with pictures of Siamese twins, which they were calling monster babies. And this was a result of Agent Orange poisoning, dioxin poisoning. And I was just sitting there and watching this in the darkness, watching these slides of these horribly deformed children caused by us, Americans. And all of a sudden the slideshow ended and the lights went out. And we were pitched in total darkness. And I had this sense that this is where they machine gun us to death. It was a momentary feeling. And I guess it was a sense of guilt that, I'm this American and I'm part of that, because that's what I was taught to believe. And when the lights went on, I realized that the foreboding sense of doom didn't exist, but not only did it not exist, the Vietnamese almost went out of their way to be gracious and understanding that it wasn't us that dropped the Agent Orange. It was the military and the government's policies that dropped the Agent Orange. So,
was that catharsis, Eddie?
Was that catharsis?
Catharsis, did that occur?
I don't know.
That moment right there.
Mental washing.
Yes.
It's a baptism.
It was a baptism?
Thanks, the good Catholic speaks.
Pen to the church. There was a certain thing. I got to say, yes, it was against the thought. In some ways, that it was like closing the door on this thing. Like, for 17 years, whatever guilt I felt sort of just dissipated, because here we are with these people that are so totally understanding of our role as soldiers, and of their role and our role as human beings in a sense of friendship. And another thing I kept thinking was, could we do this in America? Like if some Vietnamese soldiers who invaded our country had come, could we sit back and say, well, here's a deformed baby caused by your bomb? And well, obviously the answer is no. You know, we couldn't do that in this country. So, you know, it's a real insight, I think, into how they think. They think differently than Americans. And I think it's part of their fascination. I think it's part of the reason why they won the war and we lost.
They understood long before we did the difference between the warrior and the war. They made the distinction. And I know VVAW has been working, we tried to inject that into the Welcome Home Vietnam Vets March in Chicago. We're pretty successful. And in some ways by now that's become fairly acceptable in a lot of parts of the United States. But they understood it long before we did, and that's what we were doing there. We were the warrior, yes, but we were not the people who caused the war to happen.
We had so many interesting visits. It's so hard to talk about. I mean, we visited
during that period of time. So it's like we went back to, we drove past areas that I'd seen absolutely destroyed, which were now built up. We went to Bachmai Hospital, which was broken to the ground. The last time I'd seen that, there was nurses and doctors digging with their hands to get patients that had been buried alive out of the hospital. And because of the callousness of the United States, when they bombed the hospital, they used delayed fuses, and while the workers were digging at the hospital, there would be bombs going off, even when planes had left. And we went back to that hospital, and now it was all built up again. And and at the same, you could see the poorness of the country. They had machines that in the United States they might not have in a hospital because Sweden or Germany or Italy or Japan gave them the most modern machine available. And they would have that, and they didn't have a CAT scan machine, or they didn't have enough aspirin, or they had 2 people to a bed, or their relatives had to come and feed them from home because they didn't have that. And it was this incredible difference. The other thing was when I went there, the Vietnamese initially had told me that no children had died. And then we went at the end, and I almost lost it because we read the names of everybody that died, and they had their ages. And the last one was that 8-year-old girl that died. And originally, that was their the proudest thing they had, was no kids had died. The only people that had died had been nurses and doctors. And they were really proud of that. And then to go back there and find out a child had died as well, it was like salt in the wound.
There was
what? In the hospital? Well, all of Vietnam, we think around 2 million. And that's civilian North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese.
It's such an incredibly difficult figure to arrive at. Anything is just the vaguest of approximation.
If we use the U.S. body count, right, we killed 68 million. That don't count.
That's everyone there 4 times
It's
over.
everyone there. By 1968, we killed everybody. But as we know, that's not true. But as near as we can add up, as good a guess as anybody is 2 million people out of a population of 60 million. Killed.
We went to Cu Chi province, and if I can remember right, they said there was 16,000 combatants from Cu Chi. There was 10,000 deaths. And that was one of the provinces
west of Saigon.
Northwest of Saigon. So, that was a province. So that's a pretty large number. They also said that 1 out of 3 families had in this particular province, 1 out of 3 families had a warring death, a war death from a warrior.
They had so many casualties that they didn't even tell you the number of people that lost legs and arms. They didn't even tell you the number of people that got wounded. In the United States, they got it down to the last goddamn guy that had his finger pricked on a sea ration can. In Vietnam, when they told you casualties, they didn't say 58,925. They told you 150,000. but they didn't know whether it was 151-22 or whether it was 148. That was, I think that was the other thing, was this question of casualties were so large, they didn't add up wounds, they didn't add up amputations. You know, it was just too much to keep track of.
There was we talked about the MIA issue, and you know, there was something like 2,000 American MIAs. Is that right? But so we asked them the question, well, what about the MIAs? And the Vice Foreign Minister?
Yeah.
Vice Foreign Minister says, well, there's something that you don't understand in the United States, that we have 100,000 MIAs. And sort of, you know, thinking was so overwhelming, and something actually that I never thought about. That, you know, it just gives pause. It gives pause to the whole argument about MIAs.
The other thing was that they had 10,000 people die cleaning out minefields when the war was over. 10,000 Vietnamese died after the war stopped, cleaning out minefields that we left behind. We had the maps, the United States, to those minefields, and we wouldn't give it to them. And we were saying, please help us go out and look for pieces of bones that fell from 6,000 feet in the sky when a B-52 got hit by a SAM missile. That's your responsibility, and we would not give them the minefield maps. And I don't care whether you like the North Vietnamese government or not. It wasn't the premier of Vietnam that was going out to the minefields to pick those mines up. It was other people like us, and with snuffies and privates and sergeants, and that were running around looking for those mines. And so that when the war ended for us, it continued for them.
When you stop.
Then in 1915, my country said, son, it's time you stop rambling, there's work to be done. So they gave me a tin hat and they gave me a gun, and they marched me away to the war. And the band played Waltzing Matilda as the ship pulled away from the quay. And amidst all the cheers, flag waving and cheers, we sailed off for Gallipoli. Oh, how I remember that terrible day, how our blood stained the sand and the water, and how in that hell that they call Silver Bay, we were butchered like lambs at the slaughter. Johnny Turkey was ready, primed himself well, rained us with bullets and showered us with shell, and in 5 minutes flat he blown us all to hell, nearly blew us right back to Australia. And the band played Waltzing Matilda as we stopped to bury our dead. We buried ours, the Turks buried theirs, and started all over again. Well, those that remained, we tried to survive in that mad world of blood, death, and fire. And for 10 weary weeks I kept myself alive, while around me the corpses piled higher. Then a big Turkish shell knocked me ass over head. When I woke up in my hospital bed, and I saw what it had done, but I wished I was dead. Never knew there were slaves dying. For I'll go no more waltzing Matilda all around the green bush orange tree. To hump him and pay, a man needs both legs, no more waltzing Matilda with me. So they gathered the wounded, the crippled, us back home to Australia. The armless, the legless, the blind, the insane, the brave wounded heroes of Sova. And as our ship pulled into circular quay, and I looked at the place where my legs used to be, and thank God there was nobody waiting for me to greet, to mourn, to pity. And the band played Waltzing Matilda as they carried us down the gangway. But nobody cheered, they just stood and stared, and then they turned their faces away. And now every April I sit on my porch and I watch the parade pass before me. I see my old comrades, how proudly they march, reviving old dreams of past glory. The old men march slowly, all bones stiff and sore, forgotten heroes of a forgotten war. And the young people ask, what are they marching for? And I ask myself the same question. And the band plays Waltzing Matilda, and the old men still answer the call. But year after year, more old men disappear. Soon no one will march there at all. Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda, who'll come a waltzing Matilda with me. And their ghosts may be heard as they wander through the billabong. Come a waltzing Matilda with me. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give in.
course, we began with 6 veterans marching in an anti-war parade in New York in 1967 under the banner of Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And that the organization grew. The major events along the way were, number one, Operation RAW, Rapid American Withdrawal. It's the first national VVAW action, which was a march from Trenton, New Jersey to Valley Forge in 1970. This was followed by the Winter Soldier investigation, in part financed by Jane Fonda. It was Vietnam veterans testifying about war crimes in Vietnam. This was 1971 in Detroit. It was followed by the most memorable of VVAW actions, which was Operation Dewey Canyon 3 in Washington, D.C. in April of 1971, with vets throwing their medals away on the steps of the Capitol. The next major action after that was preparing for the Republican Convention. A number of VVAW members going to Miami Beach in August of 1972, followed by the FBI and the government attacking VVAW in the Gainesville trials, which were immediately after that. The next major VVAW action was a counter-inaugural march in January of 1973 in protest of Nixon. After that was a major amnesty action in Washington, D.C. with 5,000 people in 1974. And I think that pretty much covers the kinds of things you're looking for. Through the period when the Vietnam War finally ended in 1975, of course, the major focus of VVAW was to bring our brothers home, to end the war. But even through that time, one of the things we were always talking about was how vets are treated after the war, which is the question of benefits for Vietnam veterans. That became, after the war, one of the major issues, and that was only accentuated by the understanding of how Agent Orange had been used to not only defoliate Vietnam, but to kill off and in various ways cause disease and problems among Vietnam veterans who are still alive today, which became a major focus of VVAW's activity. And as the U.S. government made ventures, military ventures, particularly in countries around the world and now particularly in Central America, we always kept the focus that no, there should be no more Vietnams. We cannot allow the kind of thing that happened to us in Vietnam.
He's back already. So rare.
Well, not in my case.
Bruce, look out behind you. This fella's gonna put a tray up there.
I'll be out of your way.
What a life. What a life. The sweet potatoes and apples, is that my beer? There's a couple copies that aren't even being used yet. Oh, okay. Is there, let me just roll. We need more peas and carrots. I don't know. What? There's people to the door yet, you know?
No, you have to talk to Charlie, Bill and Charlie about opening up.
Have you talked to Lambert yet?
Your house? Yeah, she's running my house. She's in charge of housing. She keeps going back and forth to the phone to see if people are called up, people are lost.
Who do I need to...
In VVAW.
How did I become what?
Interested.
Oh, interested.
Was it me?
Well, no. You had nothing to do with it. Actually, I think it was waking up at Dewey Canyon 3 and looking around and seeing a sea of green and suddenly feeling more secure than I have ever felt in my entire life.
Did it help that it was 900 men and 3 women?
Well, I didn't realize that until after I got up and moved around a little bit, but...
You were one of the most popular people on the...
Well, we wanted to...
No, you lie. That's because I was one of the few women on the mall, that's why. Well, VVAW's come a long way since those sexist days. Well, thanks to people like me, whipping you guys into line. Right?
Bye.
Why are you
Thanks for
always
watching,
right?
Jesse.
I just
Running around.
99 and 9/10%. You never listen to me.
97. Let's give me a little slack.
The toasts are going to begin fairly soon.
Well, VVAW has really lasted. I mean, I never thought it would. I thought as soon as the war was over, that would be it. But when we got together and decided that nothing had changed, not really. We'd still have to fight with the VA and the next war and all that stuff. I'm really glad we made the conscious decision to stay together because it was important, and I can see that now. Everybody's rededicating their efforts to.
Good. Maybe somebody else will run for the national.